Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. One of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. This is your hosts, Alex and Sean. On this episode, we will be talking about some heartbreaking losses for the Cubs. We'll be talking about some little bit of Bears news, White Sox finally breaking their streak, and we hope to have some special guests. All of this and more, but first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable prices. Season is over now, but that shouldn't stop you from heading on over to icehogs.com to pick up a hat, jersey, shirt, tickets for next season and more. So head on over to icehogs.com and tell them Swerski Sports sent you. Alex, my friend, how have you been?
Well, I've been pretty good myself. A little bit not too happy, let's just say, with a certain baseball team on the north side. Trying to really keep my cool about it, but it has not been fun to watch.
Yeah, that has definitely not been a fun thing to watch. Let's just jump right into it.
Yeah.
So, since our last episode, we've had a couple of series here. We've had two series, one against the Rockies and one against the Cardinals. And neither series was particularly good for the Cubs.
No, not at all. I mean, they won a game in each, but they lost both series, and it feels like you should have at least taken 2 or 3, maybe in one of them, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, in the finale of both series, you got shut out.
Yeah, and not to mention that you got shut out by, first of all, a rookie with a 7 ERA at Coors Field, and then a second time against a washed-up Adam Wainwright, who's been terrible this year, and who at one point in the game pretty much had a ball-strike ratio of like 1-1. So like half balls, half strikes. I think it was through like the 4th or 5th inning. And they didn't score any runs because they stranded so many runners.
Yeah, and it's not just that they're losing, it's that they, at no facet of the game do the Cubs look good at all.
Nope. Defense has looked atrocious. The pitching, I will admit, the pitching has looked a little better as of recently, but it's still kind of inconsistent. And the hitting is just, it's bad. Flat out bad.
Oh, yeah, the hitting has been abysmal. So, Kyle Schwarber is still the leadoff hitter. He's batting like 173 right now.
Yep.
So, I don't understand why this experiment is still going on. I mean, clearly it's not working out. Kyle Schwarber is a really talented hitter, and he's in a funk. Why don't they move him down the order? The Cubs are losing games. He's struggling. Let him work his struggles out further down the order, the batting order.
Yeah, and I get the whole argument of you're only going to truly lead off once in a game. But yeah, I think it's a situation where you got to try something else differently because right now things aren't working. And of course, it's not just his fault. The whole team, except for Bryant and John Jay and Miguel Montero, aren't hitting. But when that happens, you almost got to say to yourself, why don't you change things up a little bit, move things around? Because clearly what's happening right now is nothing's working. And you could tell me over and over, I get it. Baseball's a long season. Yes. There's a lot of games, yes. Things are going to go up and down, yes. It's part of a long season. But when you go this long where things are struggling, it's almost like you got to step in and do something.
Yeah, I mean, because usually what happens is, all right, things don't go well, but it's usually the ebb and flow is usually not all consistently where everything is in a valley at the same time. I mean, the Cubs' pitching's not good, the fielding's not good, the hitting's not good. All those things are happening at the same time. That comes to a point of, hey, maybe we need to fix something.
Or you know what? At least I don't want to sound like a meatball or sound like a hot take kind of guy, but I personally think Joe Maddon needs to really kind of step in here and say, "Hey guys, let's pick it up a little bit," because I feel like he's so unbelievably relaxed about everything, and I just think this is a time where he's got to really step in and say, "Hey, things aren't going right. Let's wake up here."
Oh, absolutely. I mean, listen, I know Joe Maddon is a great manager. I get it. And he helped the Cubs. Well, he didn't lose the Cubs the World Series last year. But something's got to change. And what the approach that the team is taking, for whatever reason, is not working right now. Is the bats are cold. The arms aren't there. And every, Monday or Tuesday morning when you have the pitching coach on the radio talking to Mully and Hanley,
right?
He keeps saying the same thing. He's like, well, the arms will come around. It's still early in the season, and you know what? There's plenty of guys whose arms are already geared up this early in the season, and they're going to stay geared up. I mean, I pulled some stats as of Thursday for the Cubs, and I mean, the stats just don't look that pretty for the Cubs. Arrieta, I mean, as of Thursday, had a 5.35 ERA, and granted, when you look at the FIP and the xFIP, they were 3.77 and 3.56. And not to get too nerdy in this, but for those of you that don't know what FIP is, it's fielding independent pitching, and it kind of measures it's sort of like an ERA, but it's what the ERA would look like over a given period of time if the fielding behind the pitcher was at the league average for balls in play.
Right. It takes into account the baseball unpredictability and the factors that lie into a ball being caught versus not being caught, because ballparks are different. Fielders, what they have behind them are different between each pitcher. So it really kind of adjusts it to make it more accurate to the very differentiating, how do I say it? The different factors of each team and each ballpark and each situation. It makes it a lot less black and white, where it's just like, oh, he gave up this many earned runs in this amount of time. There was a lot of factors to that, the defense and a lot of other things.
Yeah, so it basically strips out the role of luck, defense, sequencing, making it a more stable indicator of how the pitcher's actually performing over a given time. And the xFIP is it also factors in that sometimes home runs are just luck, and so it factors that in a little more. So by those statistics, Arrieta, not so bad. I mean, that 5.35 ERA, not good number, but when you look at the FIP and the xFIP, that sort of tell you a little bit more of an indicator of how effective he's pitching. And those numbers are 3.77, 3.56, and they reflect they're not as bad as you would, I don't know, sort of the eyeball test is showing. And actually at this point they're a little bit better than they were last year. But the scary number for me on Arrieta is the batting average for balls in play this year. So when somebody hits a ball in play, as of Thursday, they were hitting 364 against him, as opposed to in the previous 2 years, 241 of the Cy Young year and 246 last year. So it's 120 points difference.
Well, you look at some of the games he's pitched, particularly the one in Colorado. How many times was it a little bloop hit? Or how many times was it like a ground ball single? It's like where everything they were just hitting was dropping, and therefore the BABIP is going to go higher. And it wasn't just in that game. It was in a lot of the games, a lot of bloop singles and kind of slow choppers that find a hole. A lot of stuff that's not really hit hard that is fielded in some instances, but hasn't been fielded in this other instance, whether it be the lack of defense or just the fact that it just found grass, and that's going to make your BABIP higher.
Yeah, and it just so I mean, Arrieta's just numbers are just not looking so hot, and then there's another pitching metric. I believe it's pronounced Sierra. And
yes,
it's a little more in-depth look at, it's more predictive of how and why, like of pitching. So it ranks pitching a little bit better than some of the more metric ones like FIP, xFIP, and ERA. And basically, this year right now is Arrieta is slightly above average as far as his Sierra number up to Thursday. So we're not including the game against the Cardinals where he didn't look so good. But then sort of looking at the rest of the starting rotation is Lester has a fairly decent ERA with a 3.21 as of Thursday, but his xFIP is a 3.77, which shows you that his defense is really backing him up, or he's getting lucky on some pitches. And his BABIP, his batting average for balls in play, is the highest it's ever been in his career at 316. And his Sierra number is a 386, which puts him like as an average pitcher in the league.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. You watch John Lester pitch this year, and you're seeing him either A, work out of a lot of jams, or B, just grind and grind and grind in the long at-bats, and he's piling up the pitch count by the fifth inning. Whether he's working out of jams, which a lot of the times he is, or just trying to get a batter out and they're fouling off 100 pitches, it's just frustrating because he's had to grind in pretty much every single game. He really hasn't had an easy game, and he had plenty of those last year.
Yeah, no cruise control games. He's had to really work, and there's been games where he's worked out of them effectively, but he's in these jams that he really shouldn't be in.
Yeah, and you know, some of that can be attributed to the fact that he's working with Wilson Contreras and that there's going to be some growing and communication pains with that. I mean, you saw it on opening night, how frustrated he was getting with Contreras and the way things were going. So I get there's a bit of a growing pain there, but, you know, you hope eventually that any of those continuing jitters or miscommunications between the two just kind of goes away, because you need John Lester, because he is the anchor of that rotation. John Lester is absolutely your number one guy, and you need him to be effective.
Yeah, you have to have your ace pitch like an ace.
Right.
Have to.
Exactly.
But then the numbers get really interesting for the next two starters. Is Lackey, who has a Thursday, had a 4.29 ERA, but his FIP is a slightly lower 4.16, but then his xFIP goes to a 3.35, which is just kind of says that like he's had some bad luck basically when he's pitched, because that's actually a fairly decent number. And interesting enough is the batting average when balls are in play for him is a 310, which is a pretty high number. But then when you go to the Sierra number, it's a 339, which puts him at somewhere between above average and great. So, you know, it's a little bit of interesting number. And, you know, when you think about it, Lackey, other than a couple starts, has actually been pretty effective this year.
Yeah, you know what? I think of two starts right away. I think of the one he had in Colorado where he pitched 7 innings with 10 strikeouts, the first guy to do that since Pedro Martinez in 1997. And you also look at that game he had against the Dodgers where he gave up the leadoff home run and like had a really, really tight first inning, 'cause, like he loaded the bases. But after that, he was on like pure dominant cruise control. And a lot of the other games, too, it feels like he has one bad inning, and then other than that, he really just kind of settles down. So John Lackey, yeah, he's really struggled at times, but he's also looked really good at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, you know, he was the one where I think everybody expected the wheels to fall off prior to the season starting, and he's probably been the most consistent starter for the Cubs this year.
Right, because you look at Kyle Hendricks, who started off really rough, but as of late, he has really come around. But you didn't see that in the beginning of the season, because I think his first game, that was in Milwaukee, and he gave up like 3 home runs that day. Got a win because the offense showed up, one of the few times it did this year so far. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right about Lackey. And again, yeah, he hasn't been perfect. He's had some really rough patches as well, and you need more consistency. But I do have to give Lackey credit for the times he has looked good, because he has, especially in Colorado.
Oh, absolutely. And but his numbers are a little bit interesting too. Is 3.4 ERA, especially considering some of the rough starts he had at first. You're like, all right, not so bad. But when you start looking at the FIP and the XFIP, they're hovering right around 4, which not so good. But the batting average in balls in play is a low. It's 250. But when you look at that Sierra number, he is a 4.2, which is below average, which has him as a below average pitcher. And so it's just interesting to see the numbers and then try to fit together where the eyeball test fits in.
Right, and like I said, his last few starts have been really good after the rough start, so if he keeps going on the trend he is, I do believe you will see continued increasing bettering of those numbers. Here's an example. Like I said, ERA not nearly as effective as FIP, because I love using FIP. I think FIP is very important. In the last game against Colorado, he had his ERA go from 2.98 to 3.40 because when Carl Edwards Jr. came in and inherited those 2 runners with 2 outs, and the pitcher who had never gotten a hit before tomahawked a pitch over his head into left field, that boosted his ERA from 2.98 to 3.40. And that just kind of sums up everything that's gone on so far this season. But I do feel as he continues to go on, the numbers will improve because he's looked much better.
Yeah, I agree. And some of these statistics also are meant to be taken over a longer time period and not a snapshot.
Right. It's a small sample size.
It is so. I mean, we're 20% of the season, so it's still a little bit of a small sample size. But the one where eyeball test and numbers just really hammer everything home is Brett Anderson with his 8.18 ERA. His FIP and his XFIP are both in the mid-4s. His Sierra puts him as awful, and his batting average with balls in play is a robust 400. You have to expect that experiment to be over, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's funny about Anderson is that in his first start he looked really good. In his second 2, the ERA numbers looked good, but the FIP numbers were not, because he was A, working out of a lot of jams, and B, he was getting a lot of BABIP luck, especially in his game against the Dodgers. He was giving up rockets that were either going right at people or rockets that were flagged down in amazing fashion by Albert Almora Jr. So that kind of goes to show how effective a pitcher is, compared to the basic standard number of ERA versus kind of both the eyeball test and the advanced metrics, because sometimes the eyeball test can fool you either way.
Yeah, absolutely. But a couple of another interesting things. I went through and the games through Thursday, because I was at a slow day at work, if you can't tell, is assuming that all of the Cubs' first inning runs were earned runs, or even not, is if you average it out like an ERA through Thursday's games, the Cubs had 34 games, 41 first inning runs that given up, which is, if you calculate it like an ERA, is a 10.85. It's
Yeah,
bad.
that's not very good.
No, so the problem is part of the problem is you have a team that's struggling with getting behind, and the bats are cold, and when you're hitting from behind, it's you have the bats. It's a lot more of a stressful situation to hit.
Yeah, exactly.
And then also I want to ask you, I want your opinion on this. What's going to be the first thing that comes around for the Cubs? Is it going to be the starting pitching, the fielding, or the bats?
Ooh, that's a good question. I feel like it's going to be the bats. I think if they come back to Wrigley Field and the weather is warm, I think they're going to start to heat it up a little bit because they're still getting on base, but once they get on base, they cannot score runs for the life of them. But the batting averages overall are still pretty low. They're taking some walks, but I feel like with warmer weather coming this week at Wrigley Field, I think that's going to make for better hitting. Now, the pitching has been better. The starting pitching has been better. There's no doubt. But I think that this is a perfect opportunity for the hitting to really start to come around.
Just a couple more points on the Cubs is one, it was funny is with a losing streak intact, John Lackey was kind of the last guy you wanted to go up and pitching in Colorado in a big game.
I know.
And not only does he pitch really well, he pitched 7 innings, which is something we talked about. Is there's not very many games that the Cubs starting pitchers have gone 7 innings, and he went 7 innings, 0 earned runs, and a 10-2 strikeout to walk ratio.
By far the best start of any Cubs starter so far this season.
Yeah, it was great. And it wasn't. It was also nice to see Baez and Bryant hit home runs. But
Yep.
Another thing is the Cubs brought Eddie Butler up, and he won the first game of the series against the Cardinals, and had a good outing. 6 innings pitched, only 2 hits gave up. Do you think this was? A case of a rookie pitcher where nobody really seen him before and he had the benefit of nobody seeing him before? Or do you think this is potentially the Cubs lucking out and finding somebody that can fill in a back of the rotation spot?
Well, Eddie Butler was a very highly touted prospect with the Colorado Rockies. I think he was drafted in the first round, so obviously people saw his value. And when you play in Colorado, that ain't easy. If you look at what he did that night, and I was watching him carefully, mid-90s fastball with great tailing movement. I mean, that is so hard to hit. His command was spotty at times. He had some stretches where he was walking guys or not throwing anything close to the plate, but he'd eventually use his stuff to get out of it. So I think the Cubs may potentially have a decent asset on their hands. Am I going to expect that kind of outing every time? No. I think there's going to go times where he struggles, and I think he still needs some fine-tuning, maybe with more secondary pitches, maybe getting his command a little better. So there's things to be done. But I like the direction of where this kid is going because he shows he has the talent. The track record says that GMs like him. I think Theo Epstein got him for a reason. So I am confident that this is the kind of guy that we're going to like having on our team down the stretch.
Better than Brett Anderson.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's not saying much, but yeah.
Today, Arrieta had another rough outing. 6 innings pitched, 7 hits, 4 earned runs, 2 home runs. And he's alternated this season, but, I mean, clearly there's been a precipitous drop in his fastball velocity. But also, he struggled. It's either been a lot of things right over the heart of the plate with not the best of command, or things have been outside the strike zone with not a lot of command. And both those two things together are sort of a recipe for disaster going forward.
Yeah, I know. And what's so frustrating about this all is that the stuff still looks good. Like, if you take away the strike zone and you look at, like, the movements he has on the pitches, I mean, it still looks really, really good. It still looks really hard to hit. But it's all about location. It's like real estate. If you can't locate it, then what good's your stuff? So, yeah,
I mean, if you put the tape on of some of his dominant starts from 2 years ago, you'll see a guy who basically painted the edges of the strike zone and was getting those calls. And so the guys at the plate had to protect the outer corner, and then he would either go inside or he'd go outside of the zone and catch you swinging. And he was getting a lot of strikeouts. But if you watch now, he's not hitting those, those outside corners or the inside corners, those, the edges of the strike zone. He's missing a lot. And when he's compensating, he's throwing a lot of things right through the heart of the plate. And is the stuff any less dominant? No, but when it's concentrated in one area, you just swing through and the likelihood of you hitting it is much better.
Exactly. And, I think there's so many factors that go along with Arrieta. One, he's not locating well. There's no question about that. Two, there's a little bit of a change in approach. No question about that it's, causing some issues. And I think there are just times when hitters have just got him figured out. Like the first few years he was in the NL, they didn't know what the heck he was doing, and they were caught totally off guard. I think some batters have legit learned to lay off some of his pitches and just know more what's coming at them. So I think there's just a lot of factors.
Oh, absolutely. And Scott Boras has got to be pulling his hair out because, he should have just signed an extension. That would have been the smart thing to do because he's going to lose a lot of money in the open market after this season.
I can't help but wonder how this performance the past year going back to mid 2016 has affected the way he thinks in his approach, thinking that he could have had a buttload of money and a buttload of years of guaranteed play, and that didn't happen. I can't help but wonder if that gets to him.
Oh, I'm sure it does. But I think for me, this last week of Cubs baseball, the most frustrating part was, and you alluded to one of the things earlier, is certain pitchers that it's not like they're facing Bob Gibson. They're facing some mediocre to sub-mediocre pitching, and they're not hitting it. On Wednesday's 3-0 loss to the Rockies, number one, they're at Coors Field. You should be able to just hit a lot of balls. And two is they were facing Marquez, who had a monster ERA going into that game.
Yep, and what I say when that kind of thing happens is watch Marquez, watch his next start be against the Padres or something, and he gives up 8 runs.
Yeah, you need to pounce on a guy like that. You absolutely need to pounce. If you lose because you gave up more home runs, that's one thing, but you can't lose 3-0 in Colorado and against a pitcher that's struggling.
I mean, they were getting no hit into the 7th inning?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Bryant doubled in the 7th and to break up a no-hitter.
Right, that's right. Because I was driving home from somewhere in the middle of the day. I looked at my phone to see what was going on in the game, and it says no-hitter alert through 6 innings, and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, the Cubs only ended up with 3 hits.
Yeah, and what's sad is that when Bryant doubled, because I was following it on the radio at the time, it was a leadoff double, and it was just 1-0 at the time, so the tying run was at second base, and then 3 just consecutive awful at-bats, and then nothing scored.
Yeah. And the other one I think you alluded to this one too, is Wainwright has not been good this year, and
not at all.
he basically led the Cardinals to a 4-hitter by the Cubs, and 2 of the 4 hits were by Ian Happ.
Yeah, they're by this kid we just called up. I mean, really exciting, no doubt, to see this kid hit, but if he's the only one, I mean, come on.
So I guess the last point I want to ask is do you think part of the reason Ian Happ was brought up right now was for Jed and Theo to showcase him a little bit, because the Cubs are going to need to make a move sooner rather than later for pitching, and they want to showcase this kid that he can hit in the major leagues and not just in minors?
Honestly, I think that was more of the case for Candelario staying up, because when Ian Happ came up, Russell was battling injury, Hayward's on the DL, Zobrist was dealing with a bad back, Bryant was sick, so guys were dropping like flies. However, I do think when they called him up, they had that in mind. It wasn't the reason they called him up, but they said, hey, if we call him up to help, fill the gap with some of these injuries, this is the perfect idea to say, hey, look what we got, let's showcase him. So the factor, no, but a factor, I think it did play in a little bit, yes. But I think for what you said, the sole reason or the main reason to call someone up and do that, I think that's what they were trying to do with Jeimer Candelario, and so far that's been a complete flop, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I mean, I know a lot of fans, and I've read a lot of things talking about the Cubs needing to make a move for starting pitching, and I know this is something that's definitely on their radar, but we're not even at the midway point of May yet, and to make a deal at this point is just, I mean, it doesn't happen. I mean, think about when the Cubs made that trade where they traded Samardzija and they got Addison Russell. I want to say that was right around the 4th of July.
It was on the 4th of July. I'm pretty sure it was on the 4th of July.
That was a very early trade, and part of the reason that the Cubs got so much in return was they basically told Billy Beane, if you want an extra basically month of these pitchers, then you better pony up. And I think teams are going to lick their lips to say that to the Cubs. You want a starting pitcher and you want him for an extra month and a half. Oh, you better pony up to pay for that extra month and a half of having him in your rotation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, did you hear the story about what Billy Beane said to Theo Epstein before he hung up? He basically said, I just gave you the next Larkin, pretty much.
And he paid through the nose, and that was a move of desperation, and you see what happened to the Cardinal or the A's after that.
Yeah, not good.
Not good. But luckily, coming up is Cubs have Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and San Francisco. Hopefully, those are teams, hopefully, that you can beat up on a little bit and pad your stats. But the way it's going is those are going to be a struggle.
Yeah, look, the Giants have not looked good at all this year. They did just beat up on the Reds. The Reds have gotten off to a really hot start, but then since then, they've either looked really good or really bad. Milwaukee is a team I wouldn't take too lightly. I mean, they're playing pretty well right now, but at the end of the day, you should take 2 or 3 from them because the Cubs are a better team than Milwaukee, but Milwaukee is not like they were in 2015 or 2016, a team you just expect to steamroll because they got nothing. Milwaukee's got some things going for them right now, but at the end of the day, this is a stretch of home games. You have to take advantage of this. You absolutely have to.
Yeah, I mean, they're not, pumpkin pie teams. These are teams that are going to play tough, but if you're a team that expects to go to the World Series and compete for a World Series trophy, you need to go in there and dominate against those teams. You need to bare minimum win all 3 of those series.
Absolutely.
If not,
you take 2 or 3 from all of them, I'll take that.
Well, we've got some guests on the line. I don't think you've met them before, Alex, but they've been on the show before, and they're really great guys, and they do a podcast, 2 podcasts. One is called Bawl, Bawl, B-A-W-L, and the other one is Bawl on Bulls. So I want to introduce two of my favorite people is Big Dave and Chris. First question I have for the guys, and I'm going to have to, because we're having some technical difficulties here, is you'll be able to hear Dave. Dave can't hear us. Is, does Wade opt out? Follow-up question, is that $23.8 million that important?
Nobody's turning down $23.8 million. I don't see it at all. And to turn it down, and he doesn't even have to start, coming in next year. He could come off the bench. So you can literally sit on your behind and make $23 million just to be on a okay team in your hometown? I don't see him passing that up, man.
That's a lot of money.
He'd technically be making more money next year than he did this past year.
I just want to put this all into perspective. Is one time I found $50 in a winter coat, and I lived my life differently because of that. And now an extra $23.8 million?
The last 5 years the last 10 years of number 16 draft picks is Gershon Yabusele, Terry Rozier, Yusuf Nurkic, Lucas Nogueira, Royce White, Nikola Vucevic, Luke Babbitt, James Johnson, Maurice Spates, and Nick Young. And the last time somebody decent was drafted at number 16 was Hedo Turkoglu in 2000. What do you think happens with number 16?
All right, you hear me? Yeah, I'm not tell you what I did, but my foot hit the cord and unplugged the microphone. But anyway, so this passion about the 16 pick, it just got to me. But goes back to like before the season started, it's a big conversation we have other podcasts, other Bulls fans was like, should the Bulls make the playoffs to get a better pick and get a lottery? And Dave and I were like dumb fans. We call us the dumb fans in the sense that we said, we want to see like okay basketball. Like I'm a big fan of Wade. I want to see Wade play. I like basketball. I like the Bulls. If they're on TV, I want to watch bad or not. So if I want to watch the Bulls, have them be watchable, and I like to see Wade play and Rondo plays. It's gonna be an interesting season to see him play and see what happens. And it was an interesting season, and I got that. But at the cost of having not being a lotto and having now the 16 pick. Will I do it all over again? Yes, I would. The 16 pick, I have no idea, because it's interesting because like all these guys, like we've seen great players, like Curry and just a numerous amount of players in the NBA get picked later, in the first round or second round that become good players. And sometimes you just don't know who's going to be a great player, who's going to be the guy to put in work in the gym, and become a good player in the NBA, regardless of your draft, status or draft pick. So at 16, you named some names that I have no idea who the hell they are, and I'm pretty sure they're not in the league. Maybe the Bulls could work out some kind of trade or something. I don't know. I guess the question is, you could ask, like, are the Bulls in position to make some trades, in the draft, or are they gonna make any other additions to the Bulls this year? Going by the press conference of what I'm hearing, I don't think so. I think they're waiting for this year to go by, with Rondo contract and Wade, and then next year figure out what you're gonna do with Jimmy Butler, and Wade's gone. You got to get that money free and see what you can do. And LeBron's a year older. Hopefully you can make progress, but unfortunately, I think next year is gonna be a lot of the same. I don't think they're gonna do much. Hedo, the best passing worst point guard player ever. Like this dude would get assists, but he's a bad passer. I didn't get it.
Well, I want to thank the guys from Bawl for being on the show. Chris and Bawl is Cdub and Big Dave. You can check them out. They do two great podcasts: is Bawl on Bulls and Bawl, and you can check them out on Twitter at Bawl Sports, BAWL Sports, or ballsports.com. Thank you guys for being on the show. So I guess the last thing we won't need to talk about, and it's probably pretty quick, is a few little Bears things. Mm-hmm. The enthusiasm. Is this week, to nobody's surprise, they cut Eddie Royal. And I saw some people on Facebook on the CSN thread about it. Is they were shocked that they cut Eddie Royal. I was shocked that they were shocked because hasn't played well. He's been injured, and they saved $5 million on the salary cap for cutting him with no penalty.
The guy got injured all the time. I mean, when you're so injury prone like that, you're not going to keep him around because he had some flashes of doing some good things, and then he got hurt, and then you just kind of forgot about him, and then you're like, oh yeah, Eddie Royal's kind of a thing, but he's still hurt, or he's kind of a thing, and here he is. Oh, he just got hurt again. So I really wasn't surprised.
Yeah. They cut Cornelius Edison, and not a shock to me either, is he didn't get a lot of playing time. He only plays 3 positions, and there are 3 positions that the Bears are pretty solid in. The guards, 2 guard spots, and the center spot. So,
wasn't he with the team since like 2015-ish? Like he's been on the practice squad, kind of up and down.
Practice squad, at back end of the roster. He's been there for a couple years. Yeah, I just not shocked. They got rid of Paul Lasike. Again, not a shock. But the one for me that was not a super shock, but a little bit of a shock, was when they parted ways with Will Sutton. He was a guy that was brought in by the last regime to play the 4-3 scheme. And when they switched to a 3-4, he was one of the first guys I expected to get cut because he doesn't particularly fit any of the spots on a 3-4. And he managed to hang around, and he filled in when Eddie Goldman got hurt, and he played fairly well. I mean, mediocre. So I was shocked that he was still on a rookie deal, that they didn't want to keep him around for the cheap contract. But, is what it is. I guess they thought that he didn't have a shot, and they were going to let him go and compete somewhere else.
Yeah. Oh, well. I didn't really look much into it. After the draft and before training camp starts, I was really just kind of tuning out the Bears because I'm too upset at the Cubs and paying attention to other things. But I will say I did listen to the Mitch Trubisky stuff when he first arrived and started doing football activities. Because, he's the future face of your franchise, so I figured I might as well hear what he had to say, and that's really about the extent that I've really paid attention to with this team the past few weeks.
Well, tomorrow they're going to be bringing in Victor Cruz, formerly of the Giants, of Super Bowl fame.
Yeah.
And people are legitimately excited about this, and I can't figure out why, because he's a shell of his former self, and honestly, barring injury, even if they sign him, I don't know if he makes this roster.
Yeah, I mean, he was a big name a few years ago, and in his prime, I was a huge fan of his. Watching him just make these awesome catches and help Eli Manning on offense back in 2011 during that last Giants Super Bowl run, that was really fun to watch. That was also 2011, and since then, he's dealt with numerous injuries and, like you said, a shell of his former self. I think people, when they hear a big name like that, even if they're completely washed up, they just kind of naturally get excited. So, it's whatever. We'll talk to them, see what happens. Maybe they sign him. Maybe they sign him and then he gets cut. Maybe they sign him and he makes the roster. I don't know. But, yeah, it's definitely something to mention that he is nowhere near the real Victor Cruz, and he probably never will be again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the thing you think about is last year they kept, to start the season, 6 wide receivers. So assuming they do that again, is they'll be keeping Kevin White, Kendall Wright, who they brought in. He'll probably be replacing Eddie Royal as the slot receiver. Cam Meredith they're not getting rid of. Deontay Thompson probably not getting rid of. Marcus Wheaton was a big pickup. Josh Bellamy is a great special teamer. And Victor Cruz is not playing special teams. and he's not going to beat out some of those other names. So I just don't see him making this roster, even if they do sign him. I mean, they're going to cut Ruben Randall, I think, for the same reasons.
Yeah. When they signed Ruben Randall, it's like, oh yeah, there's another name that, has been out there in many football households, I guess, if you're a diehard football fan. But small little things like that. It makes it a little more interesting, I guess, that they're former big names, but it's really nothing to be like, wow, they just landed this big free agent. Wow. If this was, like I said, this was 2011, 2010, and they signed Victor Cruz, it would have been like, holy crap, we just got Victor Cruz. But it is 2017.
Yep, absolutely. And I put together every player that's currently under contract for the Chicago Bears, decided to do a really, really rough depth chart. And I started looking through, and it's not great by any stretch, but you're slowly starting to see better depth and less holes than I really thought. Quarterback, it's going to be interesting to see what they do, because last year they kept 2 quarterbacks on the active roster. This year you're absolutely going to keep Glennon and Trubisky. Connor Shaw is the only one on this whole roster that has experience with your system. So, and you signed Mark Sanchez, and you have to figure if something happens to Mike Glennon, is you don't want to trot Mitch Trubisky out there. You probably want to put Mark Sanchez to be the guy that gets beat up and takes all the abuse until you can build a team around Mitch Trubisky.
Oh, dear mother of God. Can you imagine the fan reaction of that happening?
Oh, the ratings, the people will not go to games. There'll be so many no-shows. TV viewership it'll be way worse than this past year.
And this year was pretty bad, especially those last few home games. Those were quite empty. I mean, at least half empty. And, to an extent, I get it. If you'd rather want to watch Mitch Trubisky versus Mark Sanchez, I mean, I get it. Fans want to get excited and see what the new kid could do. I get it. I understand. But also just understand that there is a plan with Trubisky in place, and the Bears are going to follow through that. So as painful as it may be, just keep that in mind and be ready for that scenario.
Yeah, even though I would say the average Bears fan would much rather lose with Trubisky than win with Mark Sanchez.
Well, I mean...
They hate them that much. But you have positions like running back where I expect a name that you're used to get cut. Is Jordan Howard's not going anywhere. You drafted Tariq Cohen for a reason. And you signed Benny Cunningham because of his ability to special teams. Is that leaves either Jeremy Langford or Kadeem Carey possibly as cuts.
Yeah, now here's my question for you. Who do you think likely gets cut, Carey or Langford?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's really, for me, I would say if I was making that choice, it would be who's healthiest. But I have a feeling that John Fox is much more in the Kadeem Carey camp, but that he was also a draft pick by Emory, whereas Jeremy Langford was a draft pick by Ryan Pace. So you'd have to think that Pace would want to keep Langford over Carey. So it's going to be interesting to see, because if all things equal, I think it's going to be a little bit telling of if there's a power struggle going on in Hallis Hall.
Yeah, because, it's kind of funny to think about first overall, like saying Jeremy Langford, 2 years ago, he looked like this running back of the future. Everyone was getting excited about Jeremy Langford. Then Jordan Howard comes in, so you're like, okay, Jordan Howard is the main guy, but Jeremy Langford right behind him. And now we're talking about the possibility of Jeremy Langford getting cut.
I mean, that's kind of the lifestyle of a mid to late round running back, is you don't have a lot invested in them. And, you feel like you could go out and get somebody in with a 4th, 5th, 6th round draft pick and plug them in. That's kind of the realization of the NFL today. It's partially the reason why you had a Hall of Famer in Adrian Peterson, and he sat for how many months and nobody wanted to sign him.
Yeah, I mean, if you would have said that a few years ago, people would be like, now I want to sign Adrian Peterson, wow. And now he's on the Saints, and that's going to be really weird to see.
Yeah, I mean, even the Patriots were just like, nah, not interested. And let's see, what else was interesting on the roster is I started on draft night. I guess it was my own fault is I didn't sort of look at the depth chart a little more closely on draft night, but I was a little disappointed because I thought that defensive line was going to be a little thin. But I started looking through, and I mean, they've got Akeem Hicks, John Jenkins, Jonathan Bullard, who was third round pick last year, Mitch Unrein, Jay Howard, Eddie Goldman, C.J. Wilson, and I was like, you know what? Actually, they're kind of, they've got some decent talent there. You have to expect Jay Howard, Akeem Hicks, and Eddie Goldman to be your 3 starting interior defensive linemen, but John Jenkins, Jonathan Bullard, C.J. Wilson, nice backups. That could leave Mitch Unrein, who was a starter last year, to be cut because he's just not good enough to make it on this round. And that would be a huge upgrade because he was far and away the weakest link on your defensive line last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And plus, we're talking about the Bears, and we're talking about them actually having some depth. When's the last time we've talked about that? So like you said, to your point that you made earlier, when you were saying that there's more talent and depth than one may think, you're absolutely right. There is a bit more depth now, and that's what happens when you get the time to keep building more assets. And we're not saying that the depth is fully there. We're not saying the holes are fully filled, but there is progress on that front being made.
Yeah, and a lot of people completely lost their minds that the Bears didn't draft a cornerback in this draft. But I started looking through the depth chart, and they signed a lot of free agents for short. Of course, they're short-term deals for the most part, but they signed a lot of cornerbacks that are improvements over what they played with last year. Prince Amukamara is not great, but he's better than what you had last year. Marcus Cooper, better than what you had last year. B.W. Webb had more interceptions than the whole Bears secondary combined last year. And you're getting Kyle Fuller healthy again. And if you guys don't remember, he had a really good rookie season. If you can get him anywhere towards that, you have 4 pretty solid cornerbacks.
I was just talking about Kyle Fuller with somebody on another show, and we were talking about how Kyle Fuller, this is his year to break out because he's got to want it. He's going to want to work hard. And frankly, I think the Bears are really praying that he works out because, that's a potential valuable asset you have there, and you haven't gotten the value from him that you got when he first came up in 2014. So, this is a big year for him.
Absolutely. And this is a boomer. I mean, this is a make it or break it year for him because the Bears had the option for a 5th-year option because he was a first-round draft pick, and they declined it. So this is his 4th year in the league, and this is his final year of his contract. And if he wants to continue playing in this league, he's going to have to play really well this year and stay healthy.
Absolutely. And you know what? I want to see it because watching Kyle Fuller when he played in his first, 5 weeks in 2014, watching that was a lot of fun. And I really thought we had a good corner on our hands. And I'm like, he's going to be great for years to come. This is awesome, yada, yada, yada. But in typical Bears fashion, things kind of fizzled out with injuries. So I would love to see him get back to that.
Yeah. And the only 2 positions where I I was left where I was like, there's still a lot of work to be done, was safety. Quentin Demps was a nice pickup, but he's a little bit older. He's on the back end of his career. You have to assume he's going to be a starter. And then it's, can you find a second starter between DeAndre Hall, Adrian Amos, DeAndre Houston Carson, Harold Jones Corte, Deion Bush, and Eddie Jackson? Can you find that second starter?
Yeah, there's a lot of question there about... But, I mean, mainly Demps is one guy who is interesting because, like you said, he's at the tail end of his prime, he's older, and when they send him, I like the player, I just hope he does well at his age and where he's at in his career. And we talked about the depth and yada, 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 and it's like, you look at that aspect, you're like, I don't see as much of it. So, that's one spot that I think is kind of shady, for sure. But we'll see.
And the other one is offensive line. In the interior of the offense, you have to be pretty happy because you have Josh Sitton, Kyle Long, Cody Whitehair, and Hroniss Grasu was supposed to be your starter at center last year. So you have 4 guys that could, and Eric Kush played well in times that he had to step in. So you have some depth is in the interior of the offense, but those tackle spots, it's still really iffy. Did you bring in anybody to compete with Bobby Massey and Charles Leno? I think ultimately Jordan Morgan, the draft pick, could play left tackle or right tackle, but he is from a D2 and he's going to be a rookie. That's a big thing to jump in there and ask him to do, but I think ultimately in the long run he could play those positions. You brought in Tom Compton, who was a swing tackle for the Atlanta Falcons last year. Could he be somebody that steps in and replaces one of those two if they don't play well? That's a big question for me, is how the offensive tackle plays.
Yeah, the tackle is definitely the weak spot on that line for sure, because the inside, you got 2 Pro Bowlers there and another young, very promising career in the center. We saw last year where, especially at the beginning of the year, where our tackles were just kind of being run around. People just literally run around them with ease. So that wasn't good. I wish there was a little bit more improvement in the tackle position. That's for sure.
Yeah, you just wonder if you'll have another windfall like Josh Sitton last year, where in the 11th hour you have somebody just fall into your lap that you can sign and plug in as a starter. Hopefully something like that happens at tackle. But my question is that Ryan Clady is still available, and sure, he's long in the tooth and hasn't played great, but to compete with Massey and Leno, you feel like he's got to at least be able to compete with one of those guys.
Yeah, a guy with experience, a guy who's played a decent amount of time. I think he'd be competitive at least with him, and he hasn't been signed yet, and if he finally gets an opportunity, he's really going to want to go out there and compete and give it his all.
Yeah, but at least, looking at the roster so far, you have to feel like this Bears team is going to be run first and heavy run team. Probably 60+% run team. And if that's the case, I think you're going to see an improvement in this team on both sides of the ball, because if you're able to run the ball and establish dominance on the offensive line that way, it really helps your defense, because guys are fresher when they come out on the field and they're not out there as long, and you basically shorten the game because when the clock keeps running when you run the ball.
Right, exactly.
So I really see the Bears, the way they're shaping this roster up that they're going to be a run-heavy team to try to improve their defense and also try to keep these games low-scoring and take the pressure off of young quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's kind of the old-fashioned Bears way. Offensive, keep the ball on the ground and depend a lot on defense. So, we're no stranger to that type of play.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's all I had for the show. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Alex?
No, not really. There hasn't been really any Hawks news, so I can't really talk about that. I will ask you this, though. Have you been watching any more of the hockey playoffs?
I have watched little bits and pieces. I watched a lot of the Capitals Penguins series, and I watched a little bit of the Game 1 of Penguins Senators.
Yeah, last night I was at the Chicago Wolves playoff game, so I missed the Senators-Penguins game, but I did see the overtime goal yesterday, and that was pretty cool to see the Senators win. They're kind of the team I'm hoping wins this year. I watched both Game 7s, and it continues to amaze me how the Capitals have this great team in the regular season every year, and then the playoffs come and they lose in the second round, like every single year. It's amazing.
And the Ducks look like they are about to tie this series back up.
Yeah, they're up 4-3, a minute 12 left to go. It's kind of funny. I think about a potential Ducks-Penguins Stanley Cup final. Fans all over the world would absolutely loathe that matchup. But you got to admit, as much as you would loathe that matchup, that would be so entertaining to watch.
I don't want the Predators to make the finals for two reasons. One, I hate them and their fans. But two is it's such boring hockey to watch. Do you want people that are just casual hockey fans that are going to turn it on because it's the Stanley Cup Finals to watch this boring team, or would you rather have them watch an exciting team like any of the other teams left in the playoffs?
Well, it's kind of funny. Along with Nashville, as much as I want Ottawa to win, I'm not going to lie. They're not very exciting either. They're really not.
I guess you're right.
And Erik Karlsson has been amazing on defense, but they're not playing exciting, flashy hockey. They're just finding ways to win games. The Ducks, they're dirty and they're, nasty, but they are kind of fun to watch as much as you hate them. Because I'll be frank, I don't like the Ducks at all. And, you're right about Nashville. They're not really exciting or flashy, but they have done some pretty amazing things in this playoff run. And even though no one likes the Penguins, let's face it, it's hockey entertainment right there. So, I think that if you get Pens Ducks, that's probably the most entertaining matchup. If you want, someone underdog to win, you definitely root for like the Ottawa Senators to get in. And, just as a Hawks fan, I don't know if I could put up with Predators fans trying to rub a cup in my face. I don't think I could put up with that.
And as a TV viewership, is it really Ottawa versus Nashville that's going to, make the TV numbers light up?
Oh, no. I mean, really, when you think about it, the teams left in the playoffs, it's not really going to do the ratings any favors because the Rangers aren't in it, the Blackhawks aren't in it, even like the Kings aren't in it, the Leafs aren't in it, the Habs aren't in it.
Pittsburgh.
Like, those are your kind of go-to
Pittsburgh's
markets.
actually the highest of the TV markets for hockey.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise
but the
me.
Ducks
Not
not
at
that
all.
great. So it's, the NHL is going to be rooting like crazy for the Penguins to win. So watch for the fix to come in.
Yep. And Anaheim just scored an empty netter with 43 seconds left, so it looks like it'll be tied 1-1.
Was there anything else you wanted to add, Alex?
No, don't think so. Really good meeting your friends from the other podcasts. They seem like really cool, fun guys to talk with, very knowledgeable. hoping we could talk to them again very soon. Really love having guests on the show. It's a lot of fun. So, yeah, good show.
Yeah. So thank you guys all so much for listening. Make sure that you subscribe on however you listen to podcasts, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. Hit us up on Twitter at Swerski Sports or at ShyFanPat1. Also check out our friends at Bawl, Bawl Sports. And thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like number New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on the plains. Bears 31 to -7. The Bears. Oh, when the Bears go berry.